Hello, history enthusiasts. Welcome to the Rural Experience in America Community Civics Through Historical Inquiry podcast. The National Council for History Education, a proud member of the Library of Congress's Teaching with Primary Sources Consortium, is pleased to present to you a series of podcasts spotlighting the public history projects created by teachers, community partners, and students from all over the United States. My name's Talia, and last year I spoke to 11 teachers who participated in this project. This year, we're visiting these teachers and more as they embark on year 2. Listen in as we learn more about how they integrated public history into their classrooms. Today, we're talking to Valencia Abbott from Rockingham Early College High School, along with students and community partners, as we discuss the project Coming Home to Rockingham County and Jim Crow, World War II veterans of the U.S. Supreme Court case of Griggs vs. Duke Power Company.
My name is Valencia Abbott. I am the social studies teacher, one of the social studies teacher here at Rockingham Early College High School. I've been teaching here for almost 12 years, and this is my second go around with NCHE with the Rural Experience project. And what drew me to this project was that I've never seen a lot of professional development that emphasizes rural. And Rockingham County is definitely rural. And I think our students are so unique that they don't always fit into what others are offering. So that's why I gravitated toward this project. This is year 2. We're doing the same topic, but we're just branching out a little bit different. It's regarding a United States Supreme Court case of Griggs versus Duke Power Company and the plaintiffs in that case. So year 1, we looked at education, and their education had a real factor in the outcome of that case. So doing the research, one of the things that I discovered was that the majority of those plaintiffs, men associated with the case, were World War II veterans. As my students research, I am also researching, and they inspire me to dig deeper.
My name is John Horan. I am with the State Archives of North Carolina, and this is not directly related to this project, but I'm on a podcast, and because I'm on this podcast, I have to plug my own podcast, which is part of the State Archives of North Carolina. It's called Connecting the Docs. I'll never miss an opportunity to plug it, so here you go. That's the shameless plug for today. We interact with the primary sources that we have in the State Archives, and we are in the 4th season of that, and we distribute it widely, so please listen to that. But the point is to connect it back. We are at the State Archives a support role, and Valencia reached out to me and said, hey, we have these individuals that are part of this Supreme Court case, and then we have other people we want to talk to and do these oral histories with. So do you have, what kind of resources do you have? What kind of help can you provide? And we worked it out. And so, like I said, we are in a support role. We have primary source documentation in the archives across a number of fields, including military collections, and so I connected Valencia with my colleague, the military archivist, and at the same time, I've been out to the school to educate the students on best practices as far as it does relate to oral history and how to interview people properly and how to make sure you get the best and most efficient interview for the topic at hand.
Hi, I'm Audrey Seiler. I'm a senior at Rockingham Early College High School. This is my 2nd year doing the project, and I'm one of Miss Abbott's student researchers. I got involved because I've always loved history, and being able to connect it back here was something that I always wanted to do, and being able to go through a Supreme Court case that hasn't gotten the attention it deserved was something that really interested me.
Hi, I'm Clarissa. I'm in 9th grade, so this is my first year at the early college, and my first year in history club. And really, I did this project because I love history, and it was something that I hadn't really researched before, and I didn't know that much about.
We've established that we're on the second leg of this journey. So can you talk a little bit about
the changes you've had to make or the evolution of how this project has gotten to where it is today?
Yes. I've actually been working on this project since 2018. So NCHE, that didn't happen until 2 years ago. So I was deep into the research with this project, and that is along with the Museum of Archives of Rockingham County. So one of the objectives with that was to get a state historical marker, which we did in October of 2023. And we also got a civil rights trail marker, which was unexpected. It was great. That also happened in 2023. And that was along with doing the NCHE project. So how this evolved, especially with the assistance of the student researchers, is that I got to expand my knowledge of the case a lot more than when I was alone. There was no way that I could cover all of this and work my day job as well. So the student researchers were able to uncover tidbits of history that sometimes didn't even occur to me because they're looking at it from a different perspective than mine. And then the other thing was, along the way, I knew that I needed help because there was things that was just out of my scope. I'm not afraid to say I don't know when I don't know. And especially last year with the oral histories that we were going to collect, I had never formally done an oral history in my life, ever. And I was to teach these group of students of how to do that. So I had no problem saying, I don't know how to do this. And let's find somebody or something that's going to help support that. So that came out really great. And this year, as we look at the World War II veterans, as I said in my class many times, I don't like military history. I've come away with a stronger perspective as a history teacher and as a historian in understanding how military history changes the scope of all history, especially the ones that were able to do year 1 and year 2. And I hate that they're not going to be able to do year 3 because they're going to graduate. But anyway, I guess they have to. I like the experience that they were able to achieve, everything from doing a real oral history to finding documents on World War II veterans. That in itself makes me teacher happy.
Amazing. I have so many follow-up questions, but I think I want to pivot to talking more about the oral history component. How did you go about finding people to conduct oral histories with? And do you have any advice for other teachers or students or community partners who are interested in exploring oral histories within a public history project?
So when you want to create an oral history project, the best thing to do is to be focused in your approach. Focus your planning stage sharply. It'll pay dividends throughout the whole process. And so when you want to figure out the answers to a question, it's good to know what the question is. And then when you figure out what the question is, it's good to that's when it's time to go figure out who's going to answer that question. You know, if you have a question A, well, that's going to, okay, now you're choosing your own adventure. That means that you need to go to these people to answer question A. If you have question B, it might not be the same people. It may be, but it might not be. And so you have to figure out, that's the first step. And then once you figure that out, you can go and start interacting with people. You can go and figure out who's going to have the most to say and maybe get them on board and then talk to them. And then they'll point you in the direction of other people who will have answers for you. And then you can go to the other people and say, hey, so-and-so really recommended you for this project. And then that'll give you some more weight as well. Doing that gets a lot of collaboration involved, gets a lot of community buy-in involved, and then really lends a sort of weightiness, a heft to the project you're doing that I think it's really unparalleled in doing public history.
Audrey or Clarissa, with your experience, it's much different, I think, as a student, especially having to talk to people, strangers potentially, interview people. How was that experience? Or were you too involved in the oral histories?
So I was one of the students that did an oral history last year. And one of the key things that we did was we went with a partner for lots of reasons. And being able to find people in the community that were able and were willing to talk to us about segregation and education and what that looked like for Black students was a little bit difficult because I personally interviewed my aunt's friend who I've never met before. And I took my friend Alex with me and we went and we talked to him. But having a list of prepared questions, listening to the expert whenever he came and talked to us was really helpful because then we knew what to do. And as I was there, it was just a matter of asking the questions and knowing how to write them down properly.
Earlier, you were mentioning discovering even more information this year, especially about the World War II vet involvement. So how have you discovered more primary sources and how have you incorporated that into your projects?
For me, and probably the most expensive is ancestry.com. And that's because it's quick. It gives me results when I don't have a lot of time to go. But also, it's still not enough. It's only the tip of the iceberg. And the issue is being in a rural place. As Audrey said, this story is not well known. Even now, we have two historical markers. With me researching for over 5 years, with it getting more national attention, it's still these stories are not known. So it means that the primary sources, probably most of what we're looking for, are buried in people's photo albums, their homes. They're not being digitized. So the little parts that we do come across becomes really important. And each student was assigned a different plaintiff for the case. So just finding scraps of information was really, really difficult. I'm going to let the students share how they came across their primary sources.
Well, when I was going about finding my primary sources, I quickly found that a lot of them led to nowhere. Initially, so you have to really kind of take what you can, what you can find, and just choose a different path as you go. I know that whenever we conducted a group research session at the library, that was probably one of my favorites, just because I listened to personal accounts through tape, which I had never done before. And I think that provided a perspective that I didn't really think I could get.
I know that my primary sources for my plaintiff, which was Lewis Hairston Jr., um, most of the things that we could find were things that had to be documented, like his draft card, his army number, like all of the information that the army themselves had to catalog. And then through that, little avenues of army history have been preserved, and he happens to be in them. So those few things are really important to find. But mostly, our research has opened the door to find the context surrounding the places which they lived. So primary sources like news articles that detail protests that they would have read about because they were stationed here and this newspaper was distributed there. So being able to find things that they likely would have seen is just as valuable as something that has their name on it, in my opinion.
Getting that full scope of the story, not just of the one person involved.
Audrey found this and she took the research in a way that I didn't even anticipate. She found information in mill papers, especially in Rockingham County, when you had these mill towns. A lot of these veterans are working in these mills before they are drafted, and some after they come back. It never even occurred to me until Audrey found it. And yes, that was a really nerdy and exciting moment for us. I love when my students show and teach me things that never even occurred to me.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of piggyback on both of those points. There's the point about things being online and how it's a little bit more difficult if you're living in a rural situation, but also this other point about being surprised that something's, not where you think it is. Or you didn't think to look in a place, I should say. Perhaps you live in a rural situation, you want to do things online. In North Carolina, all of the government created documents end up in one of three locations. If they're government created, they all end up in Raleigh. We have a location in Asheville and we have a location in the Outer Banks, but those are private collections. So it's a little bit different. So government related things end up in Raleigh, which means perhaps you only have one trip that you can make to come to see the physical things, because not everything's online. Well, I want to say to make sure to use the finding aids, because the finding aids are online. And if you go into the finding aids, you might be surprised. For example, in our podcast, so here's another shameless plug. But anyway, in our podcast, we just put out an episode about, we're doing in the middle of a rehousing project that's very archival, behind the scenes stuff. So it doesn't really matter for purposes of this, except for the fact that they're also updating the finding aids as they're going through this rehousing project. And they found in the treasurer's and comptroller's papers, which sounds really kind of boring, in there's documentation about the ports. Particularly in the antebellum period, there's a lot of information about ports, and it's not necessarily it's obviously it's before World War II, it's before the Civil War, but these ports, people think, oh, I maybe as a white individual think my ancestor came through these ports, so I'm going to look at the rolls to see if I can find their names. But that's not what it is. In fact, what it is shipments of property through ports. And remember, I said before the Civil War. So that means that a lot of enslaved peoples were brought through these ports. And so it might be the only place where an individual's ancestor is named, because in a lot of other situations, it would just be a number. In the census, it's just a number. They didn't count enslaved peoples as people, except for in the census as a number because of the 3/5 clause in the Constitution. So you look back at the finding aid, and now you see that we have included the fact that these names are involved, so that you can go back and research your ancestor. So the actual rolls aren't online, so you can't find them there. But if you go to the finding aid, you can find that, and then say, here is what I want to research. When you do make your 1 or 2 trips to Raleigh or wherever you're going, if you can do so efficiently because you've utilized all of the online resources as possible.
Great advice. Be prepared. Do your research for doing your research. And so important, I think people assume that you can just Google everything. And you're right, there's so much nuance, and you really have to think critically about what you can find online and how you can use the sources to the best advantage. Thank you for that. So kind of on the note of primary sources, just to wrap this up, for the students, what kind of primary sources were you using? Were there different types? Were you looking more at documents, photos? Where were you finding them? And were you using any Library of Congress resources in your research?
For me personally, I based a lot of my research on documents and photos and more of like paper than anything like physical, I guess. Even then, it was hard to find that. I mean, anything that was used took a lot of time to get.
Where did you have the most luck when you were looking? Was there a certain database? Were you utilizing the libraries?
Mainly the libraries and local archives, museums.
My primary resources were mainly focused with what Miss Abbott said in Ancestry, because through the college we can access it for free. So I would go through and find Lewis Hairston in the census and how his age would change between different censuses because of the culture of the time and documenting birthdays and stuff like that. I also think that the Library of Congress's Chronicling America, their newspaper resource, is very helpful because I think that seeing what's not written is just as important as seeing what is written, which is something that Miss Abbott taught me. Because you search up Griggs versus Duke Power or Griggs or anything, and nothing comes up at all. Like, no one wrote about it, no one discussed it, not even Black newspapers even thought to bring it up. And so even going through the Museum of Archives of Rockingham County, their microfilm collection, looking through the dates and going, okay, well, this is when the decision got released, so we can go a few weeks past that, and it's just carrying on like nothing happened, even though this was a major change for Black Americans.
I'd like to hear more about what your experience is collaborating with all these different entities, and if you have any advice for teachers or educators out there trying to create a cohesive project with all these different pieces involved.
I will say my collaboration was never intentional at the beginning. About 12 years ago, my high school history teacher contacted me and asked me to be on the program committee at the museum. And I said, yes, ma'am. That was my push into community history. So that's how the Griggs came up. I was at a program committee meeting and we was just putting out ideas of programs. And I was like, Griggs, knew very little. I knew the name of the case. That was about it. And it was a Supreme Court case. And realizing in 2018 that the 50th anniversary was going to be in 2021. And I wanted to acknowledge that. So that snowballed into, with the NCHE and the focus on education, someone that was at that program when I got the award, North Carolina Historical Teacher of the Year, name drop John to me and saying that we may have something in common because of a project that he was working on. It was just an ask with John, would you do this for us? And graciously accepted, and now he can never go away. But that's that said, I think for teachers is one, realizing the support that's already out there, because the state archives and what they can offer makes my classroom life a lot better with this, and then to bring this to students outside of the classroom. So one's just knowing that that's out there. And then just asking for assistance. You never know.
Awesome. John, as a community partner, what has your experience been like, or do you have any advice for people from archives or museums or historical societies who are looking to work in a classroom with students directly?
Well, I would definitely reemphasize the ask. You don't always know what's out there, but I think if you make an effort to find out what's out there, you really will get ahead. If you're thinking about the North Carolina State Archives, we have a number of options for people to try to connect with us in the classroom. We create different outreach programs and toolkits and lesson plans and all of this stuff that we can package up and send out. We work with the museum, the State Museum of History to do this. They do the same thing. So if you come to us asking for something, we can point you in their direction. And at the same time, going back to the question of access, that's what I just mentioned is on a broad level. But going back to access, if you have a document that exists in the archives, you can reach out to the search room and say, hey, this piece of paper, you have it, I'd like to see it. Can you make a copy and send it to me? And we do that. And so we can't do the research for you. You can't say, hey, I want you to look through all these folders and send me the stuff that I'm interested in. It doesn't work that way. But if you have a very specific piece of paper or a very specific thing, we can get that to you. Take advantage of that. Find out what is being offered. Once again, do the research to do the research. ask, and more often than not, you'll get a yes. You'll get a bunch of no's too, I'm sure, but more often than not, you'll get a yes. And if it is no, then it's no, and you move on. There's nothing, you don't lose anything. It doesn't cost you anything. You figured it out.
I would love to hear from the students. What have some of the biggest challenges for you all been working on a project on this scale? Audrey, you've been working on this for a little bit longer, and Clarissa, you kind of just jumped on board. So, what do you think has been the biggest challenge for you, and how have you overcome that challenge?
I think for me personally, I haven't previously been like particularly interested in military history. My avenue is kind of fashion or religious history, so this has been like a whole new experience for me, like different kinds of sources, looking in different places that I hadn't before, or that I didn't have to before. It's been a really eye-opening experience, and though it was frustrating at points, it's been a great learning process, and I'm really happy that I joined when I did.
I know that my experience has been a little bit longer, but it's definitely been filled with a bit more challenges. I know my biggest challenge the first year was getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, because you're doing all this research and you don't know if you're doing it right or they're doing it the right way, and you don't know if you're talking to the person you're doing an oral history with the right way, and you're not sure where you should start with your questions. And so being comfortable with my ability to know what I'm doing was something that I struggled with. And now that I'm a senior, I just like I'm cool with it. It's fine. So now I just jump in. There's no right way to start. I start with a Google search, probably gets me nowhere, and then I just start going through the databases that I'm aware of.
Thank you all so much. And I would like to conclude if everyone has just one little snippet of advice that you have yet to share about working on a public history program like this with an educational mindset, what would it be?
My advice would be to not get discouraged and don't feel the pressure of like trying to find so much information at once, because it's a process.
My advice would be to know that the history and the research we're collecting is our stories, and that is telling us more about ourselves.
My one piece of advice would be to find something that's close to home, because chances are no one's talked about it before, and there's not really a wrong way to research if no one's done it before you.
And mine would be, don't be afraid of doing oral histories. Talking to people is fun for most people, or some people, or I don't know, me. But anyway, if you think it's going to be fun for you and you're not sure where to start, find the people who know what they're talking about. If you're in North Carolina, find me and we'll talk, and I can talk to your any group or your people, and we'll figure it out, and you can get yourself interviews.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you will also listen to other teachers, community partners, and students as they share their impressive public history projects that connect students with their community's history. You can find all the stories on our website at nccheteach.org. This podcast has been produced by Regina Holland, Program Manager at National Council for History Education, and Talia Smith. NCHE is a proud member of the Library of Congress's Teaching with Primary Sources Consortium. This podcast contains samples of Bulldoze Blues by Eleanor Ellis and Henry Thomas. It was retrieved by Deanne Arthur and Rick Arthur via the collection of Music Box Project materials found at the Archive of Folk Culture, American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. It can also be found on the Citizen DJ website. Last but certainly not least, thank you so much to all of the teachers, community partners, and students who participated in the creation of this podcast. Until next time.